Okay, so my pockets are now made. I have got a slip pocket for my manual. And then I know you can't see it too well on the camera, but I have one slip pocket there and another slip pocket. Oh, another slip pocket there. So I can put pens, my seam ripper, fabric pens actually, I always lose those. So that'll be handy going in there. But you can make your pockets any size you want. Now the one thing that I forgot to mention in video 2, and almost forgot it now, when you're doing your pattern piece, when you cut it out, try to round the corners. If you've got quite sharp corners, that's going to make it quite difficult to sew when you're doing your final assembly. So just round off those corners, then do your measurement. So as you can see on mine, my corners are just rounded over nice and neatly. The other thing that I have done is, now that I've done my pockets, I've also then put the remaining piece of foam. So now you can't see my zip at all. And then, but if I'm opening it up, there's the zip pocket. The other thing just to note, and I made a little boo-boo, is wasn't really paying attention, but I've made my zip very close to this edge. Now it's just in for my 1/4 inch seam allowance, which is good, but it just means that when I go on the sewing machine, that's probably going to be a bit fun sewing that bit. So if you are doing a zip, just make sure that you've got plenty of space either side. This side's fine, but this side, as you can see, is very close to the edge. So I just have to be careful when I'm doing that piece. The final thing to do is the assembly. So clips are really, really important. Let me get my other piece. Now my main piece is so large you don't actually see it on the full size of it on the camera. But what you want to do is have everything, we're going to be working on the wrong sides when we're doing it. So I'm going to actually take this one, let's move that out of the way. First thing to do is to match up the edges. So I'm going to turn that over because I'm going to be sewing everything in reverse. So start by running a couple of clips down. You can see, even though I'm using the foam, even the clip is squidging that down. So I'm just going to start just by extra loading up some clips on that side. And then, I'm sorry you can't see this so much. So you can see I've clipped up just that side. Now I'm going to match the other corner with the other edge of my side piece. Now you should do one side panel and then clip up the other, like sew it and then clip up the other side panel. So I'm using 3 clips just to reinforce that. And then, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to hold the camera for a moment and just step back. So there you go. You can see so far, you can see how strong this interfacing is. But I've clipped the bottom 3 and I've matched up the corner. I've clipped up the other side and matched up the corner. And then all you want to do, oops, there you go. All you want to do is just finish clipping up all the way around the top. Go to your sewing machine and then using the seam allowance you've chosen, you can go around and sew up one side. But let me just take my clips off just for a moment, because when you think about your sewing machine cover, how are you going to take it off your machine? Now you could do what? Let me just clip that back on the stand there. Now you could just grab it from both sides and just slide off, or you could add a handle. A handle normally even with foam, as soon as you pull on the handle, it pulls both sides of the machine of the cover in just slightly together. So what you could do, take a piece of ribbon and about an inch, I don't know how long that is, I've just grabbed a scrap bit of ribbon just to show you, but what you could do, have some tags hanging out the top. Yeah. Just gonna clip that just down for now. What you could do is add a piece of ribbon, baste stitch the ribbon in place, and then when your machine is sewn together, that ribbon acts as a little pull on the side of your cover, and you can have one on both sides so that when you take your cover off, you can hook your fingers in the ribbon and just pull straight up. Or you could add a handle. If you are going to add a handle, which is great, normally handles work better on a flat top. If I get my Mr. Tiny, my featherweight, that also has a flat top. So you can work out before you put your base together where you want your handle to be on your main large piece of fabric. And you can add a handle, or you could just sew some ribbon on. I've seen covers where there is just a little piece of ribbon just attached, and it's just a hook your finger on, just to hook your cover off. For this machine, I'm not going to use any covers, like any ribbon or handles at all. I just want a nice sleek cover case, but it does mean that I'm going to have to, when I take my cover off, I'm going to have to hold both sides and just lift. So carry on with clipping your cover, right sides together. So once your cover is sewn together, you're going to be looking at the wrong side. Once you've clipped this side and you've sewn this side, then you can go ahead and work on the other side. I'm going to pause the video so that I can do my clipping and then go and sew it, and then we'll have a look at what the final cover is going to look like. The one thing you may have noticed is I have not used any lining at all. It's up to you if you want to put a lining on your cover. Once my cover is put together, the inside of my cover is this fusible foam. The reason why I've chosen not to use a lining is because a lining is a separate piece completely. And although my cover might be nice and solid, the lining is going to sag. Unless, one way to get around that is if you had two-way fusible foam, so it fuses on both sides, you could fuse a piece of lining on to the other side of your shapes, and then at least you've protected your foam. I'm not going to bother. I mean, the foam itself is not going to touch the machine, so I'm not worrying at all. What it will mean though is that you're going to have seams showing on the inside, but who looks inside the inside of a machine cover? I mean, even you're not going to look on the inside. You're the only one that will know, so I'm going to leave that up to you. If you want to hide all of your seams, you can use a bias binding on the inside, but no one's going to see it, so it's entirely up to you. It just depends how you want to make your cover. So I'm going to pause the video. I am going to clip up both one side and then sew it, and then I'm going to clip up the other side and then sew it, and then you'll see the final shape of the cover. But there's then one last thing to do, but I'll show you that afterwards. Just wanted to show you before I go over to my machine and sew this. You can see just how many clips I've used. That's quite a lot of clips, but the more clips you can use on this at this stage, the better, particularly around the corners. But if you've measured around your piece correctly, then everything should match up quite lovely. Because of the foam, it can get quite stiff on the machine, so you just have to try and handle it all the way around. It will sew, even with this foam, and you can see that's quite thick, but as soon as I squash it down, that thins up quite nicely anyway. So you shouldn't have your machine, even if you're using a vintage machine, you shouldn't have any problems with sewing through. What I'm going to do, I'm not going to be able to do this while I'm on the camera, but I will be sewing like that. So I will be keeping the flat side, the main piece down, and I will literally be rolling the machine up. So it means that at some point you're going to be lifting your whole cover. Just be careful because the top will hit on your take-up lever or your tension assembly, depending on what machine you're using it on. But you can just, I mean, it's foam, so it will squish. But the more clips you use, the better it's going to be. So I'm just going to pause. I'm going to go and sew my side, and then I'm going to clip up the other side and sew the other side. And then the next time you, I press unpause, play. The next time I press play, you'll see the final cover. So one side is now sewn, and I have clipped up the other side ready. This is the side that's got the zip that I have to be quite careful with. But you can see, because of just the fact that I've used foam interfacing, that's, I mean, if I step back, that is standing up on its own, which means I know it's not going to interfere with the machine at all. So let me just sew up this side, and I'll show you the last thing left to do. Okay, so both sides are now sewn up. Now, I was worried about the edge of my zip, but actually it's close, but it worked out quite well. Now we're almost there. You can see it's holding its structure, but it's a bit at the moment. It's just a bit, just needs just some couple of little tweaks. If you want just to sharpen these edges that you've just sewn, you can go back and you can squeeze that seam, and you can do a line of top stitching, and that will help to just define those corners. The other thing we need to think about now is, if I turn it on its side, we've got raw edges now going all the way around. Now you can see the inside, you can see the seams. You can use a bias tape to just go around those seams if you really want to hide them. I'm not going to bother at all. I'm quite happy because the seams you're not going to see anyway. But what I'm not happy with is this raw edge. So what I've got is some bias tape. It's okay if you've never used bias tape before, because we're not going to be sewing around any curves. So it doesn't actually need to be, the fabric doesn't actually need to be cut on the bias. I just have some spare bias tape lying about. So let me just grab that. I'm just going to hook you onto my phone bracket there. Just stay right there. Oh, and I dropped it. So I've got some bias tape, and I think I have enough. Oh yeah, I've got plenty to go around and still have some excess. So what I'm going to do, let's show you on this side, because the camera's not actually showing you the full size of the cover. What I'm going to do is bias. Let's turn it like that for a minute. I'm going to bias that. So that's going to just hide that raw piece of foam. And it also hides these raw edges and the fact that I haven't cut that. But it's going to hide these raw edges here, and it just gives it that final little touch. Now, if you haven't used bias tape before, I'm just going to try and angle this on the camera so that you can see. So I've got pre-made bias tape, which means it's been folded, the edges have been folded in. Okay, so that when your bias tape is on, it will do that and just enclose all the raw edges. The easiest way to sew bias tape is let me do it here so that you can see the edge. I'm going to open up that seam so that you're seeing the raw side now towards the camera, and then I'm just going to clip. Oh, it's because I'm looking through the camera instead of actually looking at what I'm doing there. Let me just start another one. Clip another one just there. So the first thing to do, with bias tape is just to baste stitch right at the edge. And you're going to do that all the way around. Now, when you get, hang on, I'm trying to just bring that round. Now you can see that I've got a lot of tape and I'm going to have quite a lot spare, but that's okay. Once you've baste stitched it, oh dear Sam. Right, once you've basted around, before you get to this edge, you're going to have kind of, what you want to do is kind of stitch so that you've got two pieces kind of sticking out like that. Okay, what you can do is just fold over one raw edge, match up, fold over the other raw edge, and then you can flip both pieces over. If you want, fold that edge and then bring your other side over slightly like that so that it's overlapping that raw edge. Do a cut and then just fold that back so that when, let's see if I can do this, when you fold it over, there you go, like that, you will have a slight, get it in camera angle, it's not going to get an angle, hopefully you can, there you go, you can see that. You've got no raw edges of your bias showing, but you've got a slight lip, so think about where that lip's going to be. I'm going to put my lip, this folded piece, although once it's sewn down it's going to be more like that. I'm going to have that lip just at the back, just because I know it's there and no one else will know it's there. There's probably other ways that you can attach bias. You know, if you think about it, you could measure with your measuring tape all the way around your cover and attach your bias loop together so that it is a loop, and then you can do the whole thing. I will leave it up to you. I'm quite happy to just wing it a bit and just sew until I get to there and then just fold the edges over and just stitch. Anyway, that's the first bit. Once you've done your baste stitch, you would then fold it back onto the original crease, fold it over, and then you can do one final line of stitch, and that will stitch through this layer and the layer on the back. Then it's done. Then we'll see whether this cover actually fits my machine, which obviously it does, even though I haven't actually checked it yet, but we will check it together. So I'm just going to pause. I'm going to just do my bias. I'm also going to pinch these down. Now they're quite bulky seams, but I'm going to pinch those down, and I'm just going to do a top stitch if I can. If my machine doesn't like it, then I just won't do it. But I will just give it a go. I'm sewing on the 201, so I think it should work. Another thing is this seam here, because of the foam, it's quite bulky. So with your bias tape, you might just want to trim that down just a little bit so that the bulk isn't sitting right in the seam when you're doing your bias. If not, you can just press both those seams away, and then hopefully your bias tape is going to go over. And yeah, I mean, I'm just squidging that down and that looks like it's going to go, but we'll just see. But next thing I'm going to do is pause, and I'm going to do the bias tapey thingy. Just to show you, I've now clipped up all my bias tape. I had to remember which was the front and which was the back. So you can see just dangling out the bottom here is just that extra piece of bias, but I'm all clipped up, ready to go, and I'm just going to run a layer of baste stitch just at the edge, fold my bias over, and then I'm going to restitch. I've decided I'm not going to top stitch. I know that over time the foam will start to relax anyway, and it will keep its shape, so I'm not going to put my machine through any more thick layers than it already has done today. But The bias is the last thing.